from Spellbound Weaving and Dyeing, and welcome back to the channel. Today is part 3 of our How to Dye Cotton Yarn series. In the first 2 episodes we covered everything that you need to follow along with tutorials on this page, and in the previous episode we covered how to prepare your yarn, how to get it clean, and how to get it soaked and ready to dye. So today's the day. It's very exciting. We're going to be doing our first dye job and I can't wait for you to follow along with me. So let's get started. Today we're going to need the yarn that we prepared yesterday. I've got it still here soaking in my soda ash bath. I actually left it overnight. It's looking really, really good. It's sunk to the bottom. It's completely saturated, so it's really just going to dye so beautifully today. So we have got our yarn, we've got some rubber gloves, protect your skin when we're getting our yarn out of our soda ash bath. The next thing we've got is our mask. Today we're going to be doing a little bit of speckling, which is where instead of mixing up our dyes with water, we're going to be speckling the dry dye powder onto our wet yarn. So must protect your airways. We're going to be having lots of loose dye today, so you need to make sure that you're covering your airways, using gloves to protect you from the soda ash. The last thing that we have today for this tutorial is our dye. So I've chosen 4 colours today from Dharma. I'll show you what colours they look like when they're completely mixed up properly with water. So today we have got bright yellow, we have got deep space, we have got red violet, and we have got peacock blue. So 4 Fibre Reactive Procion dyes from Dharma. And the reason that I chose these colours is not only because I really, really like the colours that they are, but sometimes they do something really interesting when they are not fully mixed and they actually split and break into the different components that mix up to make the finished colour, which is probably one of my most favourite things about this technique. So you can do this tutorial with any colours that you want. My recommendation would be try and find colours that are complementary to each other. Just in case, you know, you're dropping dye powder on top of where there is already colour, so you might not want, say, a purple on a yellow, because it might mix a little and turn into a bit of a muddy colour. So my recommendation, definitely colours that are very complementary, or if you don't mind if things mix a little, sometimes that's part of the fun, just seeing what you end up with. So let's get started. One thing that I didn't mention earlier that we will also be needing is obviously your cling wrap. So I have prepared my bench, my workspace with my tarp. The next thing that we're going to need is some plastic wrap. So we pop that down onto the bench. This is going to protect your bench further, but you're also going to need to wrap your yarn up in something to keep it moist so that it can process and not dry out. So we've got our plastic wrap, we have got our tarp, and I'm going to be putting our yarn out now. So let's get started with that. I'm going to pop that over there. Now, gloves, very important. I've got my apron on to protect my clothes. One thing that I didn't mention in the previous 2 videos is these tutorials will absolutely work with anything that's not yarn. So you can be dyeing t-shirts, pillowcases, dresses, whatever, as long as it's made of cotton, linen, hemp. As long as it's a plant-based fibre, it will work with these tutorials. So if you're not sure if it will work, feel free to leave a question in the comments and I'll answer it as best as I can. Okay, so there are so many different ways that you can lay out your yarn, you can lay out your item that you want to dye. Today I'm going to actually be unchaining my yarn, which means you saw in the previous video we did chain it up so that it wouldn't get tangled while we scour and soak it. Today I'm going to be unchaining it while I dye it. Then when I go to rinse it, before I start wetting it or touching it, I'm going to chain it back up and then rinse it. So this is absolutely not a crucial step. The amazing and really fun thing about this particular style of dyeing is that you will end up with a totally different result by leaving it chained versus unchaining it, or, you know, just putting it wherever you want on the bench versus laying it out. So really, it's really fun to play around to see what different placements you can get, to see what different effects you can get from dyeing the exact same, you might use the same colours, the same yarn, you might use the same weaving style, the same whatever, but just by laying it out in a different way when you dye it, you can get something that looks completely different. So we've got 3 chains today. When we're taking our yarn out of the soda ash, try not to lift it up too much. You don't want it to splash. And I'm just, with my gloves, squeezing as much of that soda ash water out as I can. This is another thing that you can play around with dyeing. The more the wetter your yarn is, the more your colour will move, the more your colours will blend and bleed, which for some dye jobs can be really awesome. For others, you might want something really precise and particular, so you're going to want to get as much of that soda ash water out as you can. So all I'm doing now is I'm finding the end of my yarn, which is here. I'm going to be undoing that chain. So this is, like I said, if you're new to dyeing, this is absolutely not a crucial step. So if you're worried that your yarn is going to get tangled, leave it chained, see what you end up with, because it is a really fun thing. And I do often dye my warps chained, which is something that I will be following in the next 2 videos of this series. So in the next video, I'm going to be dyeing a full warp, so a lot more yarn than just 6 inches. Alright, so we've got our next chain, and the way that I'm laying out my warp is I'm going to be laying it all next to each other, and I'm going to be snaking it around my plastic wrap. So I'll lay out the first section there, and then I'm going to be taking the next chain, and I'm going to start again. So this way, when it goes onto the loom, all of the colour that I put up here will be at the front of the project. So it's all going to follow along. But like I said, you can just scrunch it up like this, dye it like that, see what happens, because you'll get some really fun effects. And like I said, this is one of the most fun ways to dye, speckling. I absolutely love it. So what I'm doing now is I'm sort of flattening my yarn out as best as I can, because the way that we're dyeing today, we're not going to be blending and pushing and massaging it in with our brushes. So we're not going to be getting the dye all the way through the yarn. Okay, so we're only really going to be dropping the colour onto that very, very top layer. So getting it as flat as you can is going to ensure that you're going to get a decent amount of coverage without blending it and bleeding it in too much with your hands. So just using these gloves to get my yarn out of these warp chains. And like I said, all of these techniques are going to work on anything that's not yarn as well. So if you're unsure what your item is made of, always look at the care label, because that will tell you the composition of your product. You know, it might say cotton or, you know, spandex or whatever. So often I find, like with cotton t-shirts that you buy from the shops, the stitching will be like a polyester stitching. Which means that the stitching itself won't dye using these techniques, which actually can create a really cool effect. Okay, so we've got our 3 warp chains. That's all that we're dyeing today. I know it doesn't seem like much, but all I'm doing is I'm flattening them out. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it back around and come back the other way. The second one, back around. There we go. And the third one, following it back around. Let's get started. Now I'm going to start by layering my dark colours first. So I'm going to start with, where did I put it? The deep space. Okay, so this colour, it's quite a purpley navy colour. Now, we are speckling today, so I'm putting on my mask to protect my lungs, to protect my airways. I hope that you'll be able to hear me once I have it on. It is a little muffled. So the great thing about this dyeing technique is that it's absolutely perfect for beginners, because you don't need to worry about mixing yarn with your water and, you know, not getting the shade perfectly right because you haven't used enough dye, or maybe it's too dark, or, you know, your colours are bleeding into each other because your yarn's too wet. So it's really fun, and it's one of those things where you can start small, start with a little bit and really work your way up. So let's get started. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using one of my measuring spoons and a plastic fork. It's as simple as that. My yarn's slightly damp, not too wet, not too dry, and I'm going to just get started. Okay, so taking the lid off my dye, and you can see it in there. It's a very, very dark dye powder. I'm going to take a little scoop with my measuring. So we're just taking a little bit out, and I'm just gently speckling it onto my yarn. You'll see not much is going on there, but that's okay. It's better to start with less and work your way up. And what this is going to do, once this touches that wet yarn and starts to react, it's going to have that chemical reaction. It's going to strike onto the yarn. You can see where it's, because my yarn isn't super wet, it's not sucking that dye up straight away, which is what I want. When speckling, if your yarn is too wet, it's going to just bleed, and you're not going to get those tiny little sections that you're looking for. You can always come back later if you decide, hey, there's not quite enough on there and I want a little bit more on there. You can always come back later with a different colour, or you can come back with that same colour. Another way that I like to do these little speckles, especially on, if I'm using a colour that I'm not sure I want too much of, you can literally dip your spork in, or your fork, or your skewer, or whatever you're using, and just touch it on the yarn. That's giving you those exact same little speckles, but you have a lot of control over where you want them to. I think that's good for our deep space now. The next colour that I'm going to go in with is my red violet. So these are my two real main colours. The red violet is this gorgeous, warm purple colour, which I really, really love. One of the reasons that I have chosen these particular colours is I really like the components that makes up the individual colour itself. I'll show you that soon. But when I'm testing what colours to speckle, I will literally drop a little bit of dye powder in the sink. You've seen that I have a white sink. So I can just simply drop my dye powder in the sink and it'll split and it will separate, and I'll be able to see all of the components that make up this particular colour. This is looking really gorgeous so far. Now I'm thinking I'm not going to speckle this one quite so much as the one that is on the loom. That one I went a little bit speckle crazy, and I actually flipped the yarn to dye the reverse side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speckle quite heavily on this side, but I'm not going to flip my yarn. Okay, so I'm done for now with that red violet. So now I'm going in with the peacock blue. Put my mask back on. All right, so this is quite a bright blue. I have such a huge collection of blue dyes. It's absolutely outrageous as well. So I'm not going to use too much of the peacock blue. I really want this, this piece of the collection to be quite heavy with the red violet. Now you can see where that peacock blue is striking on the yarn in a really gorgeous way. Alright, so I think that that's enough of the peacock blue for now. So I'm going to be putting my lid back on. Last but not least, I'm going to be putting in something a bit fun, which is the bright yellow. Now, because we have got some blue on here, I'm going to really be wanting to control where this yellow is going. So I don't think I'll be dropping too much of the dye powder onto this warp. I'm going to be using the fork to speckle it on. Like I said, we're not putting too much of the yellow on here. We might put a little bit more here and there. Okay, and there. It's so much fun. I love it. This just makes me so happy. Okay, so I'm sealing up all of my dyes now, nice and tight. We don't want them spilling. We don't want wastage. Okay, pop those off to the side, and I'm going to give you an up-close look of what this is doing, how it's looking. It's really, really, really exciting. Okay, can you see that? You can see some spots where the yellow is mixing with the blue, but you're getting this really cute sort of lime green chartreuse pops in there. You can see sort of over here. Oh, there's my finger. We've got some really bright pink spots. We've got some really bright blue spots. We've got our big yellow spots. we've got some areas where there is more sort of natty yarn, where there isn't so much colour, but it's all just going to look really, really interesting when it gets rinsed and when it gets put onto the loom. Okay, so what we're going to do is I am going to cover it up with our plastic wrap. That way it's going to stay nice and moist. The colours can keep developing. The reason I didn't turn it over and speckle the other side is, like I said, those colours are going to keep moving a little bit because the yarn is still damp. But let's cover it up and I'll sort of show you what the underside looks like. So you can see that it is still quite white under there. So once it goes onto the loom, it's not going to look quite so speckled. And this would be such a cool effect to do on a t-shirt or, you know, leftover clothes. That's one of my favorite things to do once I've dyed a warp. I don't want to press it down too much because we don't want to spread those colors too much. If you have the space, I would recommend leaving this on the bench or, you know, on your workspace so that you don't have to roll it up and move it. You can pop it off somewhere that it's not going to get bumped, it's not going to get moved. And the thing about Procion dyes, dyeing fibre reactive, dyeing cotton, dyeing other cellulose fibres, is that you need to leave them 24 hours at least if you're wanting sort of true to colour. You can leave it a little bit of a shorter time, maybe 12 hours if you're wanting something quite pastel. If you are dyeing things like black, navy blue, and you want a really nice solid saturated colour, you're going to want to leave it for longer, probably up to 48 hours. But it is a little bit more, it's definitely less sensitive to heat than acid dyes. You don't need to chuck it on the stove for the chemical reaction to happen. But if you live somewhere really hot, you can leave it a little bit of a shorter time. If you live somewhere really cold, you might want to make sure that it does stay warm. I've heard people say to put like a heating pad, but that, like, I'm talking somewhere really cold, say if you're dyeing in a basement. But right here on this workspace, totally fine just to leave it out. I will come back when I'm ready to rinse. Okay, our yarn has finished developing and now we're going to start rinsing. So I like to do this in the sink or the bathtub. I usually use the bathtub if I have a lot of yarn. We've only got a little bit today, so I'm going to use my sink. You're going to want your Textile detergent or Fairy or Blue Dawn dish soap. I like to keep a cloth nearby just to wipe up any spills after they happen. So we're going to start with a nice sort of hot-ish temperature, and I'm going to do simply one chain at a time because I don't want to overload my sink too much. Because we have some white spaces still left on our yarn, we want to be able to rinse this as quickly as we can to get that excess dye off so that it won't sort of back stain the white parts of our yarn. That's something that the Blue Dawn or the Centripole is really going to help with as well. It stops the yarn from back staining. So you can put your yarn into like a really soapy soak, and it's going to stop the excess colour from bleeding and staining the white parts of your yarn. So if you've ever dyed like wool or silk using acid dyes, one thing that you'll find really different about dyeing cotton with Fibre Reactive Procion dyes is that there is a lot of dye and colour that rinses off. So when you dye using the acid method with wool or silk or other animal fibres, you actually set the yarn with heat, and what that does is that causes the dye in the water or in your yarn to completely or almost completely exhaust. So it sucks up all of that colour, and when you start to rinse your yarn, it's going to rinse clear almost straight away. Dyeing cotton is not like that, unfortunately, and one of the, it can be quite strange if you're not used to dyeing it, but you will have a lot of colour running off. And I often do like hot soaks instead of rinsing for a really long time. What I'll do is I'll pop my yarn off to the side there, finish rinsing the other two, and then I'm going to put them in to soak. So I'll show you what that looks like. I'll finish rinsing the rest of this. Alrighty, so I've rinsed out a good chunk of that dye. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to make my water as hot as I can. I'm going to put the plug in and I'm going to do a really hot soapy soak with the Centripole. This just saves you so much time, being able to just soak it instead of just rinsing. You're going to be here rinsing for a really long time, waiting for that water to run clear. And you might even find that the water will run clear. You'll do a soak and then you'll find you have more dye running off. So I just think skip the rinsing for too long. Do at least probably 2 hot soapy soaks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some Synthropol in here, and you'll notice that there'll be a lot of colour coming off this yarn again when I put it in for a soak. You don't need too much, less than a cupful will be plenty. So don't be too worried if you find that you have a lot of dye coming off this yarn and you're worried about the white parts. The Synthropol is going to stop that from back staining. See, look at that. So much dye still left in this yarn. It's outrageous how long it can take, and you will find some colours are much worse than others to rinse. So the ones that I probably found the worst are blues. Red and pink can be quite full on and take a long time to exhaust fully. So look at that, that water is quite purple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the plug and I'm going to just run some more clear water in there, because look at that. If you're used to dyeing wool, you'd probably be absolutely mortified at how much colour is coming off this. So let's run some clear stuff. There'll still be plenty of soap left in that yarn, so we can put the plug back in. And like I said, that Synthropol should stop this from staining the white parts of our yarn. So look, once you rinse that clear, the white parts of your yarn are going to rinse nice and clear. So that water is super hot and soapy. Like I said, I keep the sponge here, clean up any mess as you go. Okay, so we'll leave that for probably 10 minutes. Then we're going to rinse it, and I'll probably do at least 2 or 3 more hot soapy soaks. And then I'll come back to you when it's ready to be rinsed completely clear. Okay, now that we've rinsed out most of our colour, this is on about probably the 4th soak with the Synthropol. You can see that we're getting way less colour coming off of that yarn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it one final rinse, and then I'm going to put it into the washing machine. I'm not washing it in the washing machine. This is a really important. Don't wash your yarn in the washing machine unless you want it to be quite tangled when it comes out. So what I do is I put it into the washing machine and I set it onto the spin cycle. That helps me spin out as much water as I can so that it will dry quicker. If you don't want to do that, or you don't have a machine, you can always just roll it up in some towels and stamp out as much water as you can. This just helps it to, will help your yarn to dry quicker when you're completely finished rinsing it. So one other thing to note is that between each soak, I did give the yarn a really quick rinse as well, and that has helped to exhaust the colour a lot faster. You can see those purples are just absolutely beautiful. I'm so excited. Right, so we've got our 3 little chains. Now obviously if you're rinsing and dyeing a lot more yarn, say for example you're doing, quite a lot of weft for a project, or you've decided to dye your entire warp, the longer the warp, obviously, the more yarn you have. This is going to take a lot longer. You're probably going to need to do more soaks, and you can even leave it overnight in some hot soapy water, which will really sort of speed up the rinsing process in a way. Okay, so there we go. Our 3 warp chains are now rinsed. Doesn't matter if there was a little bit of colour in that final soak, because after we finish weaving, because we are weaving cotton, we can do a really nice hot wash when we wet finish our weaving project. So as you can see already, those colours are so fun. We've got some bright blues, we've got some really cute little pops of green where that yellow has hit that blue. There's even a couple of little pops of like an orangey colour where I think the red violet has split a little bit. So I'm really excited about this, and I can't wait to show you what it looks like when it's dry. Okay, so here we have some photos of our finished dye job. You can see where the
those beautiful yellow speckles just add so much interest. I love how you can also see some pink and purple speckles amongst the blue. I love that you have that variation of the color, and I think that it's just such a really fun, easy dye job to start with, and I'm really excited to see some of you tackle this dye job. I'd love you to send me photos, tag Spellbound Weaving on Instagram and Facebook, and if you have any comments, leave them below. Make sure you subscribe for the next video. We'll be dyeing an entire warp and I can't wait.